Well, welcome everybody. I'm so excited to see so many alumni and friends, and we even have some people here that Diane is working with from her team and some clients. So my name is Jim Klein, and I am the instructional systems and learning technologies faculty member here at Florida State. And one of my duties here is to help organize what we call the Alumni Student Knowledge Exchange. And this came out of something that Dr. Bob Reeser created over a decade ago, in which the alumni give back to the program, and then we would have an April event. Well, since the pandemic began 2 years ago, we were unable to hold a face-to-face conference each April. So we've moved to have a monthly virtual seminar series in hopes that someday we'll be able to come back face-to-face as well. But this has been very successful in that people from all over the world have been able to join us as part of this alumni student knowledge exchange. And so today we have invited Diane Fryman, who is the CEO of Performance Technology Solutions in Italy. And Diane is a proud graduate of the Instructional Systems program. In fact, she and I went to school together in the mid to late 80s when she was here, and we took courses together offered by Walter Dick and Robert Gagne and John Keller and people like that. So Diane's classically trained in instructional systems. And then when she left here with her master's degree, she worked for Accenture. She's lived in Australia. She's lived in Singapore. And then she ended up forming her own company, and as the CEO of Performance Technology Solutions, she established this in 2002, and her clients consist of top multinational companies. She frequently speaks at international events and has served as an adjunct professor for several institutions, both in the United States and in Europe and in Italy itself, which of course is in Europe. Her expertise is in human resource management, leadership, and entrepreneurship. Today, Diane will discuss what her company has found to be essential in realizing transformational change in leadership and organizational cultural development. She's going to look at real case examples, talking about her various international clients, and you'll be able to discover an integrated development approach that includes training, coaching, consulting, and assessment tools to achieve desired outcomes. She's going to have these case studies, and she'll be asking you to participate. So please put on your thinking caps and be ready to type some things in the chat. And so without further ado, Diane.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jim. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, I'm going to put these in PowerPoint version. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I hope that you will put some questions into the chat, because after each one of the case studies, we'll be entertaining your questions. This is a knowledge exchange, so it's an opportunity to interact with each other. So I hope that if there's any issues related to my microphone or sound, you just let me know, give me a heads up. And I'm so excited to see so many people here that are coming from faculty, students. We've got leaders in the room from major corporations, and we all have one thing in common, and that is helping to improve performance in companies, whoever, or organizations, through whatever it is that we are in terms of our background and our training. Of course, because we do have some alumni that are here that are actually not necessarily from our particular program in instructional systems design. But I believe that you've already gotten all the information from Dr. Klein related to my experience. So I'll skip that and go straight into what I thought could be useful as an analogy to join us all together, because this parable that you might be familiar with, it's an Indian parable from ancient times that's been translated into many, many different languages and cultures. And this parable, if you've already heard about it, and even if you haven't heard about it, the 6 Indians and the elephant. So there were 6 blind Indians that were brought to an elephant and asked to explain what it is that they believe that an elephant was like. I believe this parable helps us to understand a lot of analogies, so I'm sharing it with you for this reason. So the first Indian walked up to the trunk and he touched the trunk and he said, "The elephant is like a snake." Another Indian walked up to the tusk and he said, "No, the elephant is like a spear." And so on. We get also the one who was touching the tail and said, "Absolutely not. The elephant is like a rope." So obviously they had a lot of conflict in the situation. And we can see the analogies that we might have for an organization here. We can see that the elephant could be like the organization, and everybody is from their own role, seeing the organization from their own experience. So this often can result in conflicts that we have. So we really need a very systematic and systemic approach to working on problems. And I thought this analogy for leaders could be of interest too, because until we can, as leaders or people who are doing interventions with an organization, can see the big picture and work in a systematic way, looking at all of the issues at hand, then we can't really begin to work together and take advantage of the power that the elephant has. So this is the parable that we see with a lot of good analogies. So hopefully I'll be able to bring that up as we go through. The approach that we use is about human performance technology. Those of you who are studying instructional systems design certainly know about HPT. You know about this approach. Many people throughout the world, I've discovered, aren't familiar with HPT, however. And it's an opportunity for us to explain that our work comes from a very systematic and discipline, which is about instructional design as a base, because HPT grew out of human performance design, human performance technology. By the way, I speak more Italian than English these days, so I might break into Italian. It could happen, joking aside. And you might see some British spellings in my slides as an accident, because I have now acquired many different cultures in my own being. Anyway, getting back to our discussion about human performance technology, it's a very holistic and innovative discipline, which takes its roots from instructional systems design and have expanded on it. And this is also another analogy that we see from the elephant and the Indians, is that as an instructional designer, when I first began my work, I often felt I was touching just the tail of the organization. In other words, just a part. I sensed somehow that instructional design was fantastic. It gave me a lot of very fundamental research ability and also an ability to monitor the effectiveness of what we do in our work. However, I felt I was coming in from one part of the organization. And at times I found this a little frustrating, because I'm a very results-oriented person. And I wanted to have a big impact when it came to getting results for clients. So this is one of the reasons why, as I grew as an instructional designer, I also augmented my skills in human performance technology and became certified through ISPI. At that time, that was the only organization that was doing that sort of certification. So the approach that we use is very systematic. It's very systemic. So we look at the organization by analyzing the performance gaps or opportunities for performance improvement. We use solutions which are aligned specifically to the real need that we can identify, because we are able to do a cause analysis. And that is something that I also learned through my work in the instructional design program. In addition, we are able to monitor and measure the results that are achieved. And this is something also that I learned through the instructional design program, as many of you are learning. And finally, the integrated aspect of the solutions that we provide to the organization. This is where there's a bit of augmentation in terms of the disciplines that we work through and that we apply to our clients. And you'll see it very clearly as we go through and present the cases. So clearly there is a very strong link between the performance that companies have and the way that leaders drive performance in the organization, which is essential about their ability to communicate their mission and vision, but also to create a rich culture in their organization. And it's only the leaders who could be stimulated by external consultants like ourselves, but only the leaders internally can make it live within the organization. And we all know that organizational culture is the breakfast of champions. And it's, if we have a strong organizational culture, we can move more quickly together, we can have more change, we can move through that change more easily. I learned a lot about change management when I first started working with Accenture. I was in the change management group at that time in Australia, and it gave me a lot of groundwork, and those were the places that I got to start to apply. So I'm truly a practitioner of the work that we do. Speaking of being a practitioner, I'd like to begin to share with you the case studies that we have here. Related to the clients that we've actually worked on. Here is a first case study related to a global clinical diagnostics machinery company that is all over the world. However, we were working only with the Europe, Middle East, and Africa and India part of the organization. So we had the opportunity to work with the organization because the head of the organization recognized that there were some critical issues related to conflicts among employees and also complaints and attitude issues with their employees. So they decided to call us in. They strictly noticed that there were a lot of silos, that there was little communication within the marketing unit, sharing information but amongst themselves, and also seeming that they were somehow competing with each other. That's the conflict was coming out as this competition was better understood. There was also a lack of collaboration amongst them because as we said, that was producing unproductive sort of work and missing deadlines and missing quality. So these were major issues that the team was facing. So we established together with the main client the main objectives, which was to raise the individual and group awareness of their strengths and their improvement areas in order to be able to constantly create new collaboration and improvement in their performance. What did we do? We also recognized that we needed to optimize the integration of the organizational values in the team and the efforts that they made in the communication and active listening, and show them that they actually were interdependent in order to reach their objectives. There was a need also to increase their accountability at an individual level and at a group level. How did we approach this topic, this issue, this mastery of all of these objectives together? We use an integrated approach, which we have developed over time. Of course, we always do an excellent and very thorough analysis of the organizational situation. We have to ask the client, we have to get a big picture, a photograph of the current situation. We have to gather all the information that they have that may be written. Some companies are better documented than others in terms of their organizational chart, in terms of their job descriptions, in terms of their values that they communicate, in terms of the issues that they're addressing. Others less so. Depends on the organization, whether it's a private organization or whether it is a public organization, maybe that's quoted on the stock market. Those are usually better at documenting, and because they're required by law and also by the stockholders to be able to do such things. So that makes it a little bit easier. So we gather and we get a good picture of the situation, and we also obviously interview the main stakeholders in the project. So we interviewed, in this particular case, the HR director and the head of the unit responsible for Europe, Middle East, Africa, and India, as well as some of the direct reports to these people. We also started a communication with the stakeholders very early on. We find that any program that we do is almost to be faced as a change management program. Communications is fundamental, and good communications and continuous communication of the intervention we're doing, which sells the benefits of the program and keeps people informed about what we're doing. This is essential for the success of every program that we do. So also here, instructional design became a very useful tool, because we were able to, in some cases, you'll see, besides developing and writing effective communications out about what we were doing, make videos to inform people, to keep them actively engaged regarding what was doing, but also reporting back to management. So that is an essential piece. One aspect of working with leaders that we found to be essential for increasing their self-awareness is the use of objective tools like psychometrics or personality assessments, which are validated at an international level. In this particular case, we use Facet 5, which is a Big Five tool. You may know other Big Five tools. There are many on the market. We find Facet to be an extremely complete tool, and all of our clients use it very easily. It's very easy to understand. It doesn't judge people. It provides information about strengths and about areas about how people might be perceived. So going back to our elephant analogy, we can see also that sometimes as leaders, we may not understand how we are perceived by others. And a tool which is objective and validated, like Facet 5, helps us to increase the level of self-awareness, which is the very first step to emotional intelligence improvement. You may be aware and know about Goldman's work, and we'll see a tool later, which is based on Goldman's work, but it's a 360-degree tool. Why did we choose not to use a 360-degree tool here is that we believed and understood through speaking to the management of the organization that people would benefit directly from this very quick self-assessment, which isn't evident, but which is very powerful. It provides 18 pages of a report, which we decided to debrief individually with the top management. We applied the same tool and used it with the extended group because the top management is composed of the leader, the director, with his first direct reports, which are 5 people. And underneath them, we have a team of about 35 people. So we had the opportunity to extend the use of the tool because it was very well received by the managers. And it has a part in the report, which helps the leaders to get a higher level of engagement because they're able to understand how to get the best out of their employees through the use of this tool, because there is actual pages of how to get the best out of their employee. Then they asked us to do in this program also a team building exercise. So we all went to Lisbon. People came from all over the world. They came from Russia, they came from India, they came from Italy. When we all moved towards Lisbon as a common point, it was a very small room. So we had a lot of challenges in doing our team building, which would have been better done outdoors. However, we had the limitation of working in that space. We all work to what our objectives are and our limitations. But we went through this team building exercise, which allowed the team to simulate some of the behaviors through problem-solving activities. When we use problem-solving activities in a simulation, people's behaviors are imitated as they are in real life. So the great benefit we get is through an hour and a half of a simulation for a problem solving, we can provoke sometimes some common behaviors, which are also those negative ones that come through, the biggest benefit we get in terms of ahas and self-awareness for individuals and for the group is when we have our debrief of what actually happened in that problem solving. So it was through this that the group went through many ahas. We were able to catch them in the act, so to speak, in a positive sense. And they had a lot of interesting conflicts and discussions, and through that had a lot of breakthroughs, and couldn't have had these breakthroughs had they not all observed at one time what they were doing and then generalized their observations to the real world through the debrief sessions that we had. It was extremely powerful. We had follow-ups to that session, so we were able to measure the impact. We were able to see through the individual action plans and also the group action plans exactly what happened. So it was accepted very widely. We had a lot of good results that we achieved together. We were able to increase the collaboration and communication between the team leaders and also the members of the teams. We were able to increase the engagement of the team members in their particular roles through the benefits they had, both through the Facet 5 reporting, but also through what they went through in the team building. And they definitely lowered the number of conflicts they had and were able to abolish, at least told to us by the HR and by the director, the problem about the silos. So mission accomplished. We definitely were pleased about the results. So this basically is what happened in the first case study. I'd like to stop here for 5 minutes to entertain any questions that might have come up on the chat. So I would like to ask for some help regarding the chat questions, if I could, from either Dr. Klein, or if we don't.
Sure, there's been some interesting comments that I've received. There's somebody here that's just recently done their dissertation related to change management. And so some of the questions that have been raised has to do with your use of assessment instruments to determine the success of the project. So can you talk a little bit about how you assessed your results?
Yes. So the assessment of the results. Well, first, on the one hand, we've got the use of assessment tools to raise self-awareness. How do we use those tools? We don't use them in a post intervention sort of a way. We use them to increase the awareness of individuals and also the teams. Where we are measuring is where we have the individual action plans and the group action plans. So at the outset, we had issues that were critical issues that were documented in terms of behaviors, in terms of critical issues that were occurring, like high level of conflicts or the number of employee complaints and things like that. So we're able to measure more through the observation of the KPIs, which are the critical issues, as opposed to through the assessment tools themselves. So I'm not sure I addressed the question directly, but this is how we actually measured the results. It wasn't through then reapplying again the use of the same tool. No, in this particular case, it doesn't work this way, as personality is a fairly stable sort of a measure. We don't look at that, but we're looking at the behaviors. So the assessment tools are used to help the individual to recognize they may be perceived to have certain behaviors that they may not recognize. And as a team, it's used to help them to recognize also the conflict behaviors or how they manage conflict as a team. Does that help?
So another question that has been asked has to do with culture and cultural awareness. And how you address culture and cultural awareness. Now, this question specifically wants to know about when companies are merged. For example, when a company in Mexico merges with a company in the United States, and how culture and how you address culture and cultural awareness in your projects.
Okay, wow, this is a good question. So generally speaking, if we have, that's a very specific situation. We have a Mexican organization that's being either bought out or merging with a US corporation. So here we need to really do work in terms of change management and raising the awareness in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, that how the benefits that the Mexican organization. Now, this all depends on the dynamics of the merger. Is it an acquisition? Is it a true merger? And so on. So why do I say this? Because clearly, who has the upper hand is who's acquiring, and that will always be politically the situation. Now, making people sensitive to the opportunities that we have is leadership's role, and we can guide leadership, and we do this to emphasize the benefits that we're getting from all aspects of the organization. Now, the big challenge is making them one organization. We had an opportunity to work with DHL when DHL was being bought out by Deutsche Telekom and Deutsche Post, and we had 4 different organizations that were merging together. And the opportunity we had was to develop a communications program and a recognition, because everybody was holding on to their old hat. Oh, but you guys are the DHL guys, and we're the Deutsche Post guys, and everybody was coming from their own history. So helping people to leave behind their history, to recognize that we're going forward, the benefit and the opportunity, the mindset of what the values are of the new organization. So we all have to embrace the new organization values, and we have to create programs that are not only about communicating together, how the managers then will communicate to their people, but also integrating it into their performance management system. Because if we isolate only into a training exercise, we'll never be able to see how it was implemented from a performance management point of view. So
Thank
here
you, Diane. We have another question, but I'm going to hold it for the next round because that's our
time
5
management.
Minutes.
Okay, thank you for managing that time. I really need that. Okay, international consulting firm in Italy, but a very large international consulting firm. We don't expose the names of our clients, clearly, as we don't have the permission to do so for this particular situation. So it's an ethical obligation that we have to our clients not to expose them. The background on the organization in this particular situation, we have an organization at a worldwide level which provided programs for partners. So we're at the highest level. Try to imagine a 7,000 organization, people organization with people at the top, the highest level of partner, people that have been partner for 15 years, some 10 years and so on, and that they're not participating in any sort of development program. Okay, so this is one of the issues. They're having issues related to people sitting on, how do you say, their old competencies and not innovating, and mostly not working together, because one of the job description roles for these people at that level was that they should be mentoring each other and developing each other. In other words, giving each other feedback. Well, this wasn't happening. And so they asked us to help to increase the growth mindset, in a sense, of the people at this level by introducing and their unconscious bias as well, by introducing some kind of a feedback system. So we did that. There was also no systematic approach in place in order to provide this constructive feedback. In fact, we discovered after our pilot that actually the feedback culture was extremely weak in the organization. And this was admitted to us through group meetings that we had with the partners themselves. We actually said, we've recognized this. And they said, yes, you're absolutely right. Now, we weren't told this by the HR people or by even the COO when we first started, that, look, there's no HR, there's no feedback culture here. But we did certainly discover it very quickly. So we introduced the objective, they wanted an objective and validated tool in order to provide constructive feedback between the partners and to promote a continuous sort of individual and organizational development feedback loop for them. So what they did was, what we did together with them was we did it at the needs analysis. We did what we usually normally do. As we said, we gathered all the information we could. We interviewed main stakeholders, and we started communicating out about the program after our initial design, where we were trying to promote the importance of providing feedback. So little like a videos to the people who are going to be doing the evaluation to tell them that they're doing a benefit to their leaders if they can give them real useful feedback. Then we conducted this internal training for our own consultants, because the reason I've listed in the title post-pilot is because we moved very slowly. As it was a group had very little development initiatives done with them, training or otherwise, because the partners, if they felt they needed development, they might pay for coaching outside and not tell anybody they were doing it, which is something that actually happened. We were coaching the CEO of the organization before he became the CEO, which is one of the reasons we were able to get in to do this very important project. And getting back to the issue here, what we noticed through the pilot was that because there was no feedback culture, there was a very skewed effect in the use of our tool, which is internationally validated, the Emotional Intelligence View 360 from Ken Nowak, who worked with Goldman on his consortium. We had used the tool in several other occasions, and we decided on this tool because the partners themselves, rather than using a tool like a personality assessment, we felt that they, discussing it together with the top client, that they were very self-referential. In other words, they would believe what would come from their own people, but not necessarily from an instrument. So what happened though was we had this very skewed effect of even though we did all of these communication, we had town hall meetings, we pushed out on the intranet, we did all kinds of announcements and videos and things like that. Nonetheless, as it was a very weak feedback culture, people were still rating people on a very high level, which isn't useful to the leaders, because at a numerical basis saying, yes, this person is showing this competency that could be related to unconscious bias, they're meeting with people on a regular basis, one-to-one, all different ethnicities, genders, blah, blah, blah. However, they were rating them very high, as we said. So fortunately, inside the tool, we have open-ended questions. And what did we notice? That the real feedback was coming through the open-ended questions. So there was some good, useful, constructive feedback. What are you good at? What do I notice objectively on an open level basis? And what do I notice that you could improve on? So we developed a method of debriefing that we had to train our senior consultants, coaches on, which is start with the feedback that's qualitative. Also, because you have to think that these people are very numbers oriented. So if they're influenced by numbers and they see, oh, no, I'm doing okay, they're not going to make a shift in their behavior. They needed to have this very strong qualitative feedback. So we used a process to start them off with the qualitative feedback and then to work backwards to see all the numerical feedback that came. And through the reporting process that we used, here we talk about the fact that we also introduced Facet 5 with the very top management, and I mean the board of the organization. This was used to help them because they were the only real team we worked with, because the partners didn't work together in teams. They had their own business units, or they might have been in the same business unit, but they weren't necessarily a vertical team. But the board was a vertical team and has a lot of issues. And so we applied also to that group. And by the way, we had to work in a bottom-up fashion for political reasons. We normally would have done a top-down fashion. We would have started with the board and then trickled down to the other partners. However, it wasn't allowed to do that for political reasons, which I could explain on another occasion, perhaps. What we did was the individual debriefing instead, because we needed to, as they didn't work normally with this sort of a tool, it was very newly introduced, we spent time in helping them to understand what came out of the reporting so that they could make a shift in their awareness about why is this happening. And they really appreciated, many of them really appreciated, especially the qualitative feedback that they got, because they had no clue. Because who gives feedback to their highest level leaders unless they're asking for feedback. And this was another thing that came out. It was the importance, and that's part of the emotional intelligence view, actually, is the importance of asking for feedback. Because if you are a high level individual in the organization, people are intimidated and will not give you feedback unless you're asking for it. Absolutely not. And therefore, it's not very useful to them. So we had to indoctrinate and to help to create this in the culture of the organization through the use of the tool. We did a number of individual, and every person who received, every one of the partners that received their report through an individual debrief, wrote an action plan, an individual action plan, and then was met within a 6-week time frame to see how they applied their action plan. And we monitored the results here at a very aggregate level, because we were, as it was very delicate, working with this level of an individual in the organization. And as it was a very new sort of a program, we only collected aggregate data, but we knew we had to do it. The client didn't tell us to do this, but we did it because we knew that we were going to have to convince the client there was a benefit from doing this if we wanted to continue working with them. So we invested in the methodology or the monitoring process to collect the aggregate data to say how many of the partners were writing certain objectives and that it was stimulated from the report debrief, how many of those made actions. So when in the follow-up, we trained our senior coaches also to gather information, and then to produce it into a reporting system that was very neutral. So we didn't know who was doing what, but we were able to collect together. 75% of the people started doing more one-to-ones with their people because they were given certain feedback. Others were delegating more. Others were, and so on and so forth. So we gathered that on a very open basis. We conducted a lot of group sessions because we wanted to keep the momentum going. We wanted to stimulate those who weren't working to see what the others that were working, and giving them information as on an ongoing basis at an aggregate level. Okay, composite level. So that was an important part of the benefits that this program brought. I just wanted to briefly mention the emotional intelligence view, but I think I mentioned it's an internationally validated tool, and it's based on Goldman's model of emotional intelligence. And they chose this tool because they recognized that as leaders, they could get the most benefit in terms of the intervention from focusing on the competencies related to emotional intelligence for their leaders. So what were the results that we received through this program? We were able to strengthen the culture based on an exchange of feedback and to see the continuous improvement, create that in their culture, and to maximize the collaboration between the partners and to make a more inclusive leadership. So for example, we had in this particular case, one of the top partners who hadn't done any development work in 15 years, and who even arrived at his session debrief saying, I don't know what to improve, even though he was given very direct view. Tell me what I need to do. You know the best what I should do. Well, he actually did make some changes in his activity. Instead of doing team meetings where he would 1 person to 300, he decided to break it down into small groups and to get more interaction, and to ask the young people, because that was exactly the feedback that he got. The young people in the group didn't feel that they were being listened to, and he gave them the opportunity to be listened to, because he had these one-to-one sessions. So he repeated 12 sessions instead of doing 1 to 300 people in a session. So what did we see? An increase of the partner's awareness and behavior changes related to their strength in terms of trust and transparency in the company, a focus related to the mindset that we have to continuously improve through the use of feedback, and an example of their own positive leadership. They stated that if we're not a good model, we recognize that we will not have good models underneath us. So we have to be the change that we want to see in others. So this is a chance to do the 5-minute break on the questions.
We have a carryover question from before, but I think it certainly is appropriate in a more general sense as well. And it has to do with your approach to change management. Do you do what's familiar to the organization, or do you use a method that you're most familiar with? For an example, or do you use ProSci, or do you use something different, or how do you decide your approach when you go in?
This is all about the understanding about the current culture and what they're willing to manage. So, for example, in this particular case, we have a very reserved culture. So in terms of change management, we changed the entire process based on what we understand we can accomplish. I'm not sure about the ProSci comment that's being made in the question. However, I can say that we adapt what we do to where a kind of a Gestalt approach in terms of psychology, we adapt to where the culture is at that moment, because we recognize if we're doing something that's too advanced, they will reject it. So we have to see where they are and meet them where they are.
Just comment on that response, Diane. I think that's one of the things that this dissertation uncovered, was it really has to do with context and culture. That you don't go in and say, I'm going to follow ProSci, or I'm going to be top down or bottom up. You do
cool.
what
So we're doing something good, right, Jim?
Right. Right. Exactly. Now, another question has to do with why you decided not to use 360-degree feedback. And again, this is, I think, related to the first case. And then question, and maybe we could clarify it a little bit more. This is coming from Janet. Says here, did this aspect surface during the team building sessions, or were your company employees the only ones allowed to address negative behaviors? I'm not sure what that question means. So let's go back to the first one. Why did you choose not to use 360-degree?
In the first case?
Yeah.
In the first case, the tool, well, I'll be really honest, on the first case with the machinery company that works in the health sector, they fell in love with the tool. They really trusted it. They understood from the first, how do you say, the trial that we did, that it was very accurate and that they could learn a lot from it. And they were so one of those innovative cultures that would accept that. And so for this reason, also 360, I believe the first company actually already had their own 360s that they did, and therefore they had provided us with information about the 360. So it didn't make sense to introduce another 360 because they were already using that and they had their own tools. And we're very open to looking at the data that comes from the other tools. And this is the reason why in the first case, we only use the other tool. So it was it made sense for the same reason for that question that we just answered, that it met the culture and also the specifics of the context for that particular client. So it didn't make sense.
And the follow-up or the second part of that question, Diane, is how did you address the negative behaviors that became evident?
In this particular case?
Again, I think, Janet, if you want to speak up, I wasn't sure when this came. Was this the first case or the second case, Janet?
It was for the first case.
Okay. So the negative behaviors. Can we address it at the end so that we make sure that we?
Sure.
Okay. So remind me if we don't have any other questions in particular.
Yeah, let's go to the third case.
Okay, so we're ready to go to the third case. So the third case is a renewable energies company. So they work with mostly wind power, and they are originally out of Germany, and we were working with the Italian group. So the background that we had related to this was a CEO who was promoted. So we met the HR person, and when we met, he shared with us about the enormous issues that they were having with their CEO, that he was very technically based. He was an engineer and he was excellent as an engineer, promoted then to this role as CEO, but not much of a leader, and very in terms of flexing his leadership and style, very authoritarian in terms of approach, not good at managing people. And so it started out with this kind of a briefing and this very poorly coordinated team that weren't meeting deadlines and weren't hitting their objectives. So together with the top client, with the HR and the CEO, we said we would work on these objectives to improve leadership, motivation, and team collaboration overall, increase the individual accountability. So similar to the other issues that we've seen in other organizations. And this seems to be a widespread issue for many organizations. What did we have to do in this particular case? We had to approach it. We couldn't straight on tell the CEO, hey, look, you're not a good leader. We had to softly step into it. We had to first gain his trust. So we did the analysis of the organization. We interviewed him. We interviewed the HR. We spoke to some of the stakeholders that were involved in the team. We gathered information about what exactly were the symptoms of the current situation. And we were able to then design specifically for them an intervention. We started communicating to the stakeholders. We also, in this particular case, used the Facet 5 to help the individuals to raise their own self-awareness and to be able to share it with them in what they call Facet 5 Teamscape, is where we see the interaction between the personalities of the individuals and how they work as a team through the cycle of teamwork, through innovating, through implementing, and so on, and making decisions as a team. We went through individual reporting, so individual debriefs with the people, and through the individual debriefing, starting with the CEO, of course, we were able for him to recognize through his own, because it came out actually in his Facet 5 profile, many of the issues of how he could be seen, because he had a lot of critical issues in his profile. And this was it allowed us to break the ice, that actually there was an opportunity to do coaching with him, because a person who does coaching can only do it if they really want to do it, that they see there's a need to do it. Otherwise, coaching is not effective. The person has to want it. It's kind of like you can't make somebody go to the psychologist. If they don't want to go to the psychologist, it's not going to be effective. So the same thing goes here. So we were able to get him to come around to the self-awareness that he could really benefit from some individual coaching that we started doing after we had our team building session with everybody. So we had this outdoor session. We went for a couple of days outside of Milan in a place on the hillside, beautiful. Just try to imagine beautiful green grass. You've got a lot of area to work with. We did several simulations. People were running. The way that we find that people, when they're outside of the work context, they take off their mask that they keep in the work context, so they can be more themselves, and people can learn and get to know each other better as people. And this is fundamental for a team to work effectively together. Certainly COVID has separated us a lot because of the use of the tools, but where leaders want to get to know their people, they can make time to do that, even using tools as we're using today. So it's all about the leadership and the culture that they are implementing there. So we were able then to start with the CEO. We started because he was asking then for coaching, which was the plan, but we needed him to be able to ask for it. So we had to create that self-awareness before he was going to ask. And he asked us to do shadowing in his meetings because he recognized that he wasn't effectively managing the meeting and that his people in the meetings could be more effective. So he asked us to do shadowing. We debriefed those individually first with him, and then we debriefed it with the team, our observations from the shadowing of the meetings. So these were all very powerful implementations to help the individual to improve his work. We had a very interesting breakthrough with one of his actual direct report, who was his assistant, very frustrated at the outset of the project, complaining about her boss who doesn't know how to delegate, who most of them said that there was a problem with delegation. And she was very frustrated because she was being underutilized. By the end of this program, and for the team effort that we had, people were recognizing her for her natural ability as a leader. And she was the assistant to the CEO. So she eventually emerged into a role in HR. And it was a beautiful and amazing experience to see this person go from frustration. She had psoriasis on her hands at the beginning of the process. She was overweight. By the time I saw her several months later, she lost a bunch of weight. She didn't have the psoriasis. She was blooming. She was actually doing very well. So that was one of the very interesting success cases that we saw. And she still calls me today to tell me about her career development, which is heartwarming for me, clearly, as the person who was involved in doing the work directly with them. Then, so we achieved a lot of results together. We were able to increase the self-awareness, increase trust in the team, create involvement and engagement, collaboration in the team, develop this feedback competency and related to the feedback culture, improving the internal communication, the sense of belonging to the team, and reinforcing the shared leadership and accountability related to the professional growth of all the individuals or involved in the process. It also increased delegation, especially on the part of the CEO, who was terrible at delegating. He was hoarding everything all the time. He had a very low trust, and we had to really work on him getting through. Why does he have this trust issue? Can't he let go? How could he go about delegating? And what could the approach be? So we worked on this a lot through the coaching that we did. And improved team meetings in terms of their effectiveness. So we looked at, 360-degree sort of a review about how people need to prepare, how to make an agenda, how people need to speak up, the time that they need to keep them to, what's appropriate to, if the finance person is coming, they shouldn't be showing their Excel sheets. They need to summarize and show the simplicity of so that everybody in the group can understand it, because not everybody's a financial person, and so on and so forth. So that was the end of that case, and I won't get into the lessons learned until I get case questions, and then we'll go on to the whole group, because I see we have 8 minutes remaining. Questions about this case?
Yeah. Do you want to come back and talk about the 360 and how you handle negative behaviors with the feedback, since that was one you said you wanted to hold on to?
Right. So that was in the beginning of the slides. The 360, when we use the 360 for the consulting firm?
Again, I want to make sure that that's what the person had in mind. I think it was
sorry. No, it was to do with the first case, but I think you pretty much answered it, because you said you didn't include that because the whole culture of the company did that normally.
They already had 360 in the
right.
Yes, in this particular organization. The machinery company, they already used 360, but they didn't have this other tool, and they really liked this other tool. And so from a context point of view and a culture point of view, it was much more useful in terms of raising awareness. And it was also quicker. There were a lot of advantages to using it, and they were already using 360. So they felt comfortable that they were getting the kind of data that they wanted, but it wasn't raising the level, strangely enough, that they needed in terms of awareness for people to be shifting, while the Facet 5 did help them to raise the level of their awareness in order to get a shift in terms of a transformation in behavior.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
So I don't have any other questions in the chat. Does anybody else have any further questions they'd like to ask Diane?
About this case first, and then I'll go through my learnings, sharings.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Well, why don't you go ahead and talk about everything you've learned since you've left kindergarten here at Florida State?
After I left kindergarten, I have too many learnings. There's like no way. I'd have to write a book. And so in terms of the takeaways, when it comes to transformation and building transformation in terms of leadership and culture in an organization, I think the very first step, and I think it's evident from the cases that we shared, how important it is for the first step is to increase individual and team awareness. Until we do that, people don't recognize the need to change. And you can't get transformation. You can't get the commitment, because any change requires effort. If you don't see that there's a reason to change, you're not going to change. And in the consulting company, for example, they said for years, we are so profitable. We're growing every year, thousands of people, profitability. Of course, they're not the most profitable consulting firm in Italy, but they were growing in terms of number of people and in terms of gaining more. They were buying out also other companies, and so it's growing very exponentially. But unless people see a need to change, they will not change. So it's really important to find a way to stimulate that self-awareness. And that can be done, as we said, through many different ways, but the use of objective psychometric tools or 360-degree feedback that are validated tools and done in an excellent way to introduce it, because you have to communicate the benefits. You have to educate about why, show the results, feedback, the information, constant communication. So also another learning is about moving from the awareness of the individuals in the team development to planning. So turning that into plans so that we can see how people are making changes and monitor the impact that we're having due to the transformation that we are stimulating. If we're not monitoring it, we can't show that we've had an impact, right? So that level Kirkpatrick, right? Organizational impact. And if possible, very few clients, I can tell you, when we've been offering this for years, the return on investment, very few are interested in the return. But if they can see that there's an organizational impact, they're satisfied. And we could have a whole conversation about that another time, because that's an interesting subject. Objective tools are absolutely fundamental to increasing individual and group self-awareness. And where we can, we do that also through the simulations that we do through team building, because when people observe in the room those behaviors, and they can't deny that those behaviors are occurring in the simulation, they're sort of caught red-handed, and they have to admit that, yeah, that really happened. We started competing against each other. We didn't reach the objective. We had a failure. They learn more from the failures in these team buildings than they do from the successes. And that certainly happened in Lisbon. Leadership by example, we have to walk the talk. So if the leader has to fundamentally learn how to facilitate and sustain transformational change. And the only way they can do that is through the way that they're communicating, the way that they're managing people. And so we have to work on all those levels. That's why we say the performance is truly linked to the individual leadership and the team, the way that the organization is working together. So we have to put into place the tools that we can use to also, from a performance management point of view, see that it's actually living, walking the talk. And then change is a never-ending process. And we need to ensure that high performance levels, that we can maintain organizational competitiveness by helping organizations to embrace change and to recognize that change is a common thing and that we should expect it. It's the only thing we can really count on, is that there's always going to be change. So the people who are willing to embrace that and move forward and are going to be resilient and grab onto that are the ones that are going to be happier and more effective in their work. Those are the takeaways that I bring, and I think I'll stop sharing my slides in order to see the group. If people want to turn on their video cameras to ask final questions. I see that we are almost like the Swiss. We are 1 minute away from closure time. I'm very impressed.
Okay, I'm seeing a lot of people saying this was fantastic. Thank you very much. Great job.
Pleasure.
I do have a question that came up that has to do with your teams. When you go into these organizations, what essentially is the size of your team? And to expand that a little further, what are the skills that your team, like, people have different skills.
Right. So the size of the teams, it depends on the size of the project. So if we have that project, for example, that we did at the large consulting firm, we had 5 coaches, senior coaches. They were all coaches. So they had certification from ICF. They had previous experience. Some of them were previous HR managers. So they understood also about the more higher level implications of the organization. It's a very highly skilled senior team to do a senior intervention. You can't bring junior people on to work with senior people. It does not fly. They're not convinced. You're not reputable. So that's the answer to that question. And so it just depends on what we need to do. And then we have instructional designers on staff, people that I've trained personally that do our development work, our design and development work. And where necessary, we bring in a video crew. If we have to produce video, we just bring on the skills sometimes from outside for those things that we don't do on a regular basis, if that makes sense.
Thank you. I know we are we're out of time. I just want to make sure that if there's a burning issue that anybody would like to address before we talk about our next ASKe and
Oh,
sort of put it on the
Jim,
calendar.
you know what? I forgot
Yeah.
to do something.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm so sorry. I did not show my very last slide, which was an invitation to my ebook. Okay, for free. It's on DE&I. It's on diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's written in English, and it's available if you write to us to info@ptsonweb.com. And please, if you'd like to stay in touch, link up with me on LinkedIn. I'll definitely accept. Just make a note that, hey, I was the one that was at FSU, the FSU event, and I'd be happy to link up with you so we can stay in touch. So please do all those things, and you can find our page also on LinkedIn for Performance Technology Solutions. So send those in your request for the ebook, 70 pages. There are 8 cases in that book, and I think you'll get a lot of benefit from it. So sorry about that. So I'll stop. Should I interrupt should I leave it on the screen or take it off, Jim?
Why don't you leave it on the screen?
Okay.
So for those of you that are interested, our next Alumni Student Knowledge Exchange Seminar will be on November 19 at 12 to 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. This will be Dr. Val Shute, who many of you know is retiring at the end of this semester. So she's going to give her swan song presentation about all the things that she's learned from the research she's done over the years. And then at the end of the presentation, her presentation will go 1 hour. There'll be an opportunity for individuals to say nice things about Val if they so choose. And so please plan on joining us again on November 19th at noon Eastern Time. Demetrius, again, thank you for everything that you do. Is there anything for the good of the order,
Thank you, Demetrius.
you want to tell them?
Yes, I'm actually going to drop a link to a feedback survey for today's presentation. Give me just a second and it'll pop up in the chat. And if everyone can
I asked.
do us a favor to take a couple of minutes to fill out the survey, we would appreciate it. And I'm also going to put in a link to the registration for Dr. Schute's presentation that is coming up in November.
And you all will be receiving an invitation through our constant contact list. So if you're not on our constant contact list and want to be on that, reach out to Demetrius and we can get you added. Well, thanks very much, Diane. It's been a pleasure. Very much enjoyed your presentation and catching up with you after 30 plus years of us having careers and going to different places. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And it was a pleasure working with the group. And if there's any other questions that pop up, let me know. And if I could kindly ask Demetrius to send me the chat questions, because maybe if there's a way to download it or something, then at least I could see it, because I didn't catch that as they were going through.
Yes, I've saved the chat as well.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And thank you for all of your support, Demetrius.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Klein, it's hard for me to call you Dr. Klein since I always called you Jim when we were students.
We're pretty informal here in the ISLT.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Jim.
Everybody, and we'll see you next month.
And have a great weekend.